Should we start? So, good day to everyone, and welcome to this press briefing following the conclusion today of the 10th Ordinary Session of the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly here in Chisinau. Warm welcome to also those following us online. We will just start with some introductory remarks from our co-chairs here on the podium. To my immediate right, Mr. Andrius Kubilius from the European Parliament, and also further down, Ms. Coșeru from the Moldovan Parliament. And then we can take a few questions. And just a practical piece of information, we have interpretation in English, Romanian and Russian. So should you wish to use any of those languages, feel free. But having said that, Mr. Kubilius, I start by giving you the floor, please.
Okay, thanks a lot. First of all, I would like to use an opportunity to thank Coșeru and all her team for a really very brilliant job. We had very important Euronest Parliamentary Assembly session. In some way unique, because this is the first time when Euronest Parliamentary Assembly had its session during the war period, and not so far away from where the war is going on. So that is why, of course, discussions were going on very much influenced by that situation, geopolitical situation, which is going on here in this part of European continent, which is really suffering very much because of aggressive behavior of authoritarian Kremlin regime. As you know, Euronest means the institutional arrangement of European Parliament and parliaments from Eastern Partnership countries. 6 of them: Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. We had a strong delegation from democratic Belarus. We do not have parliamentary delegation from Belarus because there is no parliament. And we discussed really very important issues, committee reports on important topics for Eastern Partnership countries, from political committee, energy committee, economy and social committees. And also we discussed and approved 3 urgency resolutions, and which are really important messages both to Eastern Partnership countries but also to European Union institutions and member states. One resolution which was approved has a title "On the Armed Aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine." It was really very important and strong language. The resolution was presented by our Ukrainian delegation. Another resolution which was presented by 3 countries, association countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and the title is on supporting the path of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia towards European Union. And the last resolution, which was presented by EPP political group, with a very clear title on strategic importance of starting EU accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova in 2023. So you can understand what we were talking in our resolutions. From one side was the war, all of us Ukraine in all the different ways. From another side, we were talking a lot about EU integration, which is very important, especially for Moldova, which is of course threatened by all the different, hybrid political interferences from Kremlin side. And EU has one very strong instrument to start formal negotiations on EU membership during this year. Together with Ukraine, that is possible, and that would be very strong signal, both for Moldova people, who, as I said, they are very much attacked by all the hybrid disinformation campaigns and so on, and also for the whole Europe. So I stop here. We are planning to have next our session in January next year. and we shall continue our engagement, European Parliament engagement with our Eastern Partnership countries, increasing that engagement. It's important that, for example, tomorrow, 2 delegations from different European Parliament committees, INTA, which is International Trade, and BUDGE, which is Budget Committee, are coming here to Chisinau, to look around, to assist, to give some advices. And also we proposed, and I think that we shall try to formalize, that accession countries should have possibility to be present as an observers in the working activities of European Parliament, starting maybe from the next Parliament, which we shall elect next May. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Ms. Coșeru, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Andrius, for the insights from the Euronest Annual Assembly, the 10th meeting of which took place in Chisinau these days. And it was a great honor for us, for the Republic of Moldova, to host this high-level event, which was dedicated to the formulation of proposals and ideas for the future of the Eastern Partnership, but also share opinions and have exchange of views on the most important challenges which affect all the 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership. As the co-chair was describing before, we had the participation of all the 6 countries. We had a delegation from Ukraine, and we all supported the efforts of the Ukrainian courageous people who are fighting against Russian Federation aggression in Ukraine and are promoting peace, democracy and freedom in the whole Europe. And we also had a participation of the democratic Belarus, a delegation from Belarus, which also had a chance to participate and to share their opinion on what is going on in Belarus at the moment. So, as I said, the Assembly concentrated its work and attention on the future of Eastern Partnership because it needs to be rethought and recalibrated during the next period of time, taking into account the recent developments, and these being granting for the Republic of Moldova and for Ukraine the status of an EU candidate country, but also giving to Georgia the European perspective of joining the EU. And also all the recent developments which are happening now in Ukraine related to the war, unprovoked war in Ukraine, which was which started on the 24th of February 2022. So the main issues which were discussed during these several days in Chisinau, they related to those challenges and risks which affect the security in the whole Eastern Partnership region, but also in Europe. And these are the security as a general issue, taking into account that there is a war in the region. Energy sector and building energy sector resilience and understanding that energy sector is another gun which is used by the Russian Federation to create additional pressure on the people from Eastern Partnership countries, but also from European Union countries. and also talking about the effects of the hybrid wars, about the propaganda, disinformation and manipulation which is disseminated in the Eastern Partnership countries, and how we all should stay together and be solidar and united during these very difficult times in order to overcome them together and to work on the European agenda and to really make possible the transformations which are included in the association agreement signed between the Republic of Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia, but also the agreements which were signed with the European Union by Armenia and by Azerbaijan, which are foreseeing the implementation of the European reforms in all our countries. And these reforms being implemented successfully in the 5 countries of the Eastern Partnership will help us to overcome this situation, will help us to build resilience, will help us to promote security, will help us to diversify the energy sources and assure more independence in energy sector, build our resilience in confronting the hybrid wars, and implement all the important projects which are supported by the European Union partners in order to transform the living of the people in the regions at the local level according to the EU standards, and really assure and convince the citizens of our 5 countries that European reforms are producing real changes and are making our life more comfortable. So this is in short, and if there are any questions, we are happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we can indeed move on to any questions, if there are any. Should you have any questions, feel free to indicate by raising your hand. It doesn't appear to be the case. Do we have a question over there, please? Could you just state your name and media organization, please?
Yes, sorry, I'm Rafael Minder from the Financial Times. I guess a question to both of you. You talked about the need to speed up EU accession, the need to start formal negotiations this year. What is the downside risk should this process not be as quick and as some people, especially people here, anticipate? We're seeing now, for example, we've seen in recent months over the Ukraine candidacy, some back and forth about exactly how quickly Ukraine could join.
Would you like to start, Mr. Kubilius?
Yeah. Well, I think that this is really a very crucial issue with a lot of geopolitical significance. I hope that it will really happen. Of course, according to all the procedures, without any, exemption and so on, criteria are very clear. Next stage will be so-called regular enlargement report, which will be produced by Commission in October. Before that, in March, there will be oral report by Commission to the Council on progress of 3 countries on their implementation of so-called conditions, which were announced last year for candidate status to have. And after that, in October, there will be a regular report. I hope that the countries are really doing great progress. We see that in Moldova, in Ukraine. Georgia is a little bit, how to say, in domestic, political battles, but that's, I hope that they will overcome. And why it's so important? Because really this is the way how Europe needs to assist those countries with very clear perspective, with the instruments which allow those countries to strengthen their resilience, to create success of their economy. I am from Lithuania, so I can tell a lot of stories how what a miracle was our integration and what we managed to achieve during those years when we are members of EU. The same is important for those countries and even for larger region, because example of the success of those countries, like Ukraine, like Moldova, which can be created only through integration towards EU, can have the major impact also on developments in Russia. After they will lose the war, and I hope that there will be opening of changes in Kremlin and in the whole Russian situation. This inspiration coming from success stories of Ukraine and Moldova and other countries can be really very, very, very important for Russian people to understand which way to go. And that is why in European Parliament we have very clear language, which we repeated here in Euronest, that this year negotiations should be started, and that the whole process would be in some way, I would call, different from Western Balkans. EU needs to come back to ambition of enlargement, and it would be good if EU would be able to go with the same speed as they were doing with us, with Central Europe, when for us, for example, for Lithuania, negotiations were going for 3 years. So we, in the European Parliament, we put very clear language again, which we repeated here in that resolution on static accession negotiations. We put the language in the European Parliament that all the process and full membership of Moldova and Ukraine should be achieved till the end of this decade. So this is ambitious calendar, but realistic.
Coșeru, do you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you very much. To add to what the co-chair said before, I would like to say that taking into account that Moldova and Ukraine were granted the status of the EU candidate country, and that we have a list of conditionalities to be implemented during this year in order to start the negotiations. We need to do our homework very quickly by organizing the national processes in such a way in order to respond quickly to those conditionalities, and start the negotiation process. It is also important to take into account that next year in the European Union is an election year, so it would be better to concentrate on this exercise of starting the negotiation process this year, and work very closely with the institutions of the European Union in order to finalize the list of conditionalities and then discuss the process of starting the negotiations for the implementation of the association agreement. This is very important thing, and also it is important to bear in mind that the countries need to switch from the neighborhood financial instruments to pre-accession financial instruments, meaning that it could be done no later than 2028. And again, taking into account that the next year is the election year in the European Union, we could come back to this issue after the elections and prepare the switching of the financial instruments to implement the association agreements after the elections will be over. And then into 2027, finalize the switching from those two instruments, because the pre-accession funds are very important in order to start real infrastructure projects and do the most difficult work, which is included in the association agreement. And before that, finalize all the work which is related to reforming the justice sector, strengthen the democracy in the country, work on human rights, but also together with the central and local public authorities and with those funds which are offered to the countries to still implement the association agreement, to be able to have projects financed by the European Union in different fields. And now funds are coming especially for the energy sector, because energy sector should be reformed, and new sources of energy need to be considered. And out of the total volume of the energy which is produced, or which for example was coming for Moldova from Russian Federation, now we need to reconsider this volume, and at least 30% of it should be coming from renewable sources of energy. We have funds for it, and we will be receiving funds for it. So this is one of the main elements and priorities of the new governmental program, which was voted last Thursday in the Parliament of the Republic of Moldova. So we will be concentrating our efforts on this agenda and slowly switching the instruments in order to do, as I said earlier, the hard work later, at a later stage. And as Andrius was saying, get prepared for becoming the member of the European Union by the end of this decade. Us and Ukraine and hopefully Georgia will also receive a status of the candidate country to the EU.
Thank you very much. Just to check if there is any other question. There seems to be a follow-up, then yes, please, go ahead.
Sorry, on the timing of accession, you mentioned the Balkans and the need to have a faster timetable like that for Central and Eastern Europe. What is the risk if countries that aspired to EU membership before Ukraine and Moldova end up being left behind? What message would that send? And just on the point about the European elections, in what way does this really change things? Do you expect, are you worried that the next elections will return a different kind of European Parliament? What is the issue with having to do it before the European elections?
Before European elections when? In 20...
Mrs. Coșeru said that it was important to get things done before the European elections.
In 2029, it would be good to have at that time, possibility for Moldova people and Ukraine people to elect, members of our own parliament. So that's important, But the first part of your question, I understood that you are talking about Western Balkans, who,
I'm talking about countries like Serbia, others, who may end up being left behind.
Well, it depends on each country, first of all, how much they want to join and how much they're doing reforms, of course. I think that, Ukrainians and Moldova people can show really good speed in that. But second is even more important, and I think that, with that geopolitical situation which we have now here in this region, in this part of Europe, I think that Europe also needs to learn lessons. What, in some way, mistakes or shortcomings in EU policies were done before the war started, and to change those policies. And one of the mistakes, at least in my opinion, and that is what the European Parliament is speaking out, was really that European Union, after we became members, Central Europe became members of EU, European Union in some way lost appetite for enlargement. And especially here in this region, Ukraine and Moldova, in some way were left in something like gray zone, which Kremlin understood that this is a territory where they can they can consider like territory of their interest. So that was a mistake, geopolitical mistake. To change that mistake, to overcome that mistake, EU needs to come back to really very clear understanding, geopolitical understanding, why enlargement is so important. Because if enlargement is not happening, then, some big powers, authoritarian powers are starting to intervene, creating, either destabilization or even the war. And the answer from EU should be very clear. The same with Western Balkans. Of course, perhaps they were not, enough ambitious to make the reforms back home, but EU had also, an attitude which, towards enlargement, when the people and the political elite in those countries started to lose the trust in the whole enlargement project. So that should be changed. That is why now with Ukraine and Moldova, joining, as accession countries, the whole pool of accession countries, including Western Balkans, Serbia, and so on, I think that, they can play a beneficial role also for Western Balkans. Because that is what will push, in general, a revision of EU enlargement policy.
You want to add anything, Ms. Coșeru?
Thank you. I would like to add that, yes, first of all, we are very happy that we voted for such an urgency resolution, which states very clearly for the European Union partners that we want to open in this year, in 2023, negotiation process for the association agreement, and why I was mentioning the elections in the European Parliament, because we want to speed up the process, and we really want to not to follow the example of the Western Balkans, and to demonstrate that we can organize all the actions in a speedier way, the way we have done it with the questionnaires when we we requested the status of EU candidate countries, Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. We filled very quickly, even with the capacities we have, Ukraine being in the war, but still we were able in a very short period of time to fill in the questionnaires, a long and a short questionnaire, and send it to the European Union for evaluation. And this is why we are sure that this can be done in a shortened period of time. And what is important during these times to assure is the communication with the population, because the population needs to embrace these values. The population needs to understand what are the benefits of the European integration and support the governments in going through this exercise, but also be present in Europe. Ukraine and Moldova, the parliaments, the governments need to be present on a permanent basis in the European Parliament, in the parliaments of the European countries, and explain what is going on at the moment in our countries, how high are the risks of not launching the negotiations this year, prolonging this exercise, because the risks are very high and they are higher and higher every day. And the pressures are coming every day, and they are becoming more and more inventive. So it is this way better to organize ourselves in such a way, Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, together with the partners from the European Union, in order to be able to finalize the conditionalities and start the negotiation process. And this way diminish all these pressures on our societies, on our economic sector, on social issues. Otherwise, the situation will just get worse and worse. And we think that we have capacities for this.
Maybe just one sentence, maybe I misunderstood your question. I was saying about 2029 elections. Next year elections are why it's important to start negotiations before. It's not that, political balance will be different in European Parliament. Everybody, we are getting 90% of votes in European Parliament to support either Ukraine or Moldova. So I am absolutely sure that it will stay the same. But the problem is, if we are not starting negotiations this year, so then election year, new commission. So the whole year I can guess that, there will be no serious job, in Brussels, from Brussels side. And we can lose, the whole year simply because of elections and all the arrangement in other institutions. So that's why it is important to start negotiations before next year.
Thank you very much. And having said that, the clock has struck 1 o'clock. So the press conference is over. We would like to thank you all for coming. We wish you a nice afternoon and we see you next time. Thank you.